Hello everybody, what is up? I am Blaine the Brain, this is the Royal Ramble, and what a great time it is to be a wrestling fan, am I right? I mean, no matter your preference, there's always going to be an option out there for everybody to enjoy. Imagine that, options, choices. So much stuff to watch, so little time. But you know what? You don't have to. I watch it for you, and I'll be talking about it, so all you need is a seat and a pair of ears. So last week, I recapped what is probably going to be the craziest week in the entire year for fans of professional wrestling, with the possible exception of WrestleMania week coming up in a few months. This past week was a bit tamer, but still pretty eventful, I'd say. I feel like the previous week was a celebration of everything that was wrestling, while this week, that I'm about to review, was more of a reboot. It feels like the year has officially begun, and we're just getting into the swing of things. I started my week off by watching the Impact pay-per-view Hard to Kill. Of course, according to WWE, pay-per-views may become a term of the past, but Impact has still had theirs the Saturday after last, and I say after last because technically the last Saturday was actually yesterday, depending on when you're listening to this. But I watched it on the Sunday, so I'll include it in this week's recap. Actually, before I talk Impact, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the magic that was Dustin Rhodes versus Sammy Guevara. It took place at Battle of the Belts Saturday night, but I also watched that on Sunday, and it was tremendous. Hands down, best match on the card, and dare I say, Sammy Guevara's best match to date, and all things considered, that is saying something. It was also Dustin's best match since the encounter with Cody a couple years ago. Just a well-told story that delivered on all points. They really developed such a natural chemistry and brought out the best in each other. Consider this, Dustin is going to be 53 years old this year. How many 53-year-olds do you know that can deliver a Canadian destroyer? How many 23-year-olds do you know that can deliver that move? I'm not really a fan of interim titles, but that aside, this match was amazing, and the rest of the matches really had a hard time following it. Nothing else even came close. So let's now fast forward to Impact. It was Hard to Kill Saturday night, January the 8th. I had Slam Wrestling's Bob Kapoor on as a guest last week to preview the event, and if I'm being honest, I was thoroughly entertained. I thought it was one of the best Impact shows in a long while. The Ultimate X match to kick things off was a pleasant surprise. I definitely wasn't expecting it to be that good. The only thing that really annoyed me though, and not just in this match but in all of wrestling, is when people try these flashy type moves just to get a spot in, where it's poorly timed and you can tell that there is obvious choreography happening. There was a spot in this match which kinda took me out of it. Chelsea Green had whipped Tasha Steelz into the ropes, but almost as soon as she did that, she extends her arms as if to say, okay, when you come back, I'm gonna catch you. Basically showing every fan in attendance and everyone watching what's behind the curtain. And then she assisted Tasha in positioning herself to deliver a destroyer on another opponent. These moves look great when you can pull them off, and I understand that this was a safety concern, but there must have been a way to work around that and think on the fly without having it look so obvious. If you can't pull off some crazy move, then don't attempt it. I don't know, I'm all about suspending disbelief in wrestling, and this spot really got to me. The rest of the match was fine, and I'd say over-delivered, though I was a little surprised by the outcome. The biggest moment on the show came after the 10-man hardcore war, when Ring of Honor stars Matt Taven and Michael Bennett, the Kingdom, along with Maria, PCO, who's the former Carl Ouellet, and Vincent all jumped the barricade and attacked the babyface wrestlers following their victory. I thought this was a fine use of the ROH talent, and this angle seems that it will benefit both sides, unlike the AEW invasion of last year, which didn't benefit Impact in the least. I just found it a little strange that these guys would wait until after the match to attack, but then Bob Kapoor brought up a good point that perhaps they waited until one team was immobile so that they could pick the bones of the other team. I also don't know if it does much to attack the high mid-card talents instead of going after the main event players, but I guess time will tell. The angle did continue on Impact TV this week, where Taven commandeered the announce table and took over D'Lo's headset after the rest of the group assaulted him, and PCO delivered an insane-looking running senton off the apron to put D'Lo through a table. So insane, in fact, that it had to be done twice because it didn't break on the first attempt. Ouch. I wasn't as impressed with the other off-camera assaults throughout the night though, as it looked weird. Firstly, why didn't the babyfaces just go after these guys together? That didn't make sense to me. The angle continued in the main event of Impact this week, when following her unification bout, the new ROH Women's Champion Deonna Purrazzo was confronted by the group, who instead decided to take out Matthew Grewald, the former Aiden English, allowing Deonna to flee the scene. This prompted Rich Swann and Willie Mack to run out, but they were also quickly taken down, which was a good thing because I had questioned why at the pay-per-view nobody came out to defend Impact against these invaders. And even in the first TV angle with D'Lo, nobody bothered to chase these guys away? It wasn't like they ran short on time. The same thing happened when they did the AEW invasion, but at least in that case, the Elite team had their own security, so it made sense that they would get the advantage. In case you missed it, I did mention that Deonna had in fact unified the women's titles, but not the titles that you're probably thinking. I was shocked and remain so to this day that Deonna did not beat Mickie James and reclaim the Knockouts title on Sunday. Look, I'm a fan of Mickie's work, but I don't think she should be champion or someone they're pushing in 2022. They had a chance last Sunday to rectify the mistake made at Bound for Glory last year and didn't do it, which was an even bigger mistake in my opinion. But I imagine that Mickie being announced for the WWE Women's Royal Rumble this year may have affected that decision to keep the title on her. I'm sure they want their title to be seen by more people, though I don't even know if Vince would allow her to wear it on WWE TV. Maybe they'll just blur it out like they did with Flair's title all those years ago. So it was Deonna who holds the AAA Women's title against the ROH Women's Champion Roxy, with both belts on the line. I did like the little pep talk that Mickie gave Roxy prior to her match. I thought that was cool and good to see Roxy getting the rub from a veteran. The match was pretty good too, just as I expected, and I love the ending where Roxy initially refused to quit, but eventually succumbed to the pressure of Deonna's submission hold and had to submit. I would have preferred this match on a much grander scale like a pay-per-view, but as I mentioned earlier, pay-per-view may be a thing of the past, and we'll continue to get these huge matches on TV. I do think it could have used a little more build though, and they probably shouldn't have done it right after a big show, and especially when Deonna had gone through hell in a gimmick match. I thought that kind of made Roxy look weak, whereas if Deonna lost, she could have easily said she wasn't at 100%. I wonder what this means for Roxy. We know that ROH is coming back in April, so this is not the end of her, but I've also seen photos of her training at the WWE Performance Center, so perhaps she could be headed to NXT sooner rather than later. And I wouldn't say a surprise entrance in the Royal Rumble is outside the realm of possibility either. The future looks very bright for this one, and she's got plenty of options and even more time. I'm sure she'll do well no matter where she ends up. So with that, I'm going to transition now and talk a little about WWE. They've had a pretty busy week too. Actually a busy month when you think about it, and it's still not over. Before discussing Raw, I wanted to introduce a new segment to the show. It's the first in a series of countdowns as we're heading towards the Royal Rumble later this month. I'm going to start counting down the top 10 non-Rumble Royal Rumble matches. And for this portion of the podcast, I will list off the first 5. Number 10, The Rock vs. Mankind I Quit match from the Royal Rumble 99. Not a technical masterpiece by any stretch, but a match for the ages that will be remembered probably forever. It was covered in the Beyond the Mat documentary, and I believe this is the match that put The Rock on the map. Looking back, I can't help but respect and admire the true passion of one Mick Foley for taking all those chair shots to the head, but I definitely wish he hadn't. It was a dramatic encounter and a well-told story though. Number 9. AJ Styles vs. John Cena from the Royal Rumble 2017. They've had better matches both against each other and other guys, but this was such an important match in that it marked Cena's record-tying 16th reign as world champion. And I like the finish with the back-to-back AAs to seal the deal. Triple H vs. Randy Orton from the Royal Rumble 2005. This was arguably Orton's best match to date and the last great match that I remember him having. I think he's one of the best in the business when properly motivated, and Triple H really brought out the best in him here. He also did a fantastic job of selling both his storyline concussion at the time as well as the knee injury. Number 7. Triple H versus Shawn Michaels in a last man standing match from the 2004 Royal Rumble. It was, I believe, the first last man standing match in Rumble history, and I can't think of a better pair of wrestlers to participate in it. Their feud had reached a boiling point, and the bloodshed in this match just added to the drama. No one could outbleed Shawn Michaels. The finish was well done, but a little cliché. Number 6. Chris Benoit versus Chris Jericho in a ladder match from the 2001 Royal Rumble. It's so rare nowadays to see a one-on-one ladder match, but these two proved why a match between just two people can still work. There were some very creative spots in this one, especially Benoit's dive through the ropes, only to be met head-on by a chair from Jericho. I'll continue counting down the top 5 a little later on. For right now, let's talk some WWE programming. I actually didn't think Raw was half bad this week. No, it was all bad. I'm only kidding. Let's relax here. It was actually pretty decent for the most part. In fact, there was a lot of storyline development this week in all of wrestling, which solidifies the point that I made earlier about this past week being more of a reboot and an official start to the year. We saw the Raw tag titles change hands in this episode, which did catch me by surprise. I feel like this was one of those surprises, though, where it was done for the sake of the surprise. There really wasn't much of a build towards this moment. Sure, they had Alpha Academy beat the champs in a non-title match last week, and they've been feuding on and off for about a month now, but they really haven't positioned Otis and Gable as a team that you'd believe could lead the division, which is the problem I have. They feel like transitional champions until they can find a better solution. I'd imagine that this is the first step in the breakup of RK Bro, but I'd actually prefer that they didn't break up the team, as they're one of the hottest acts in the whole company. I think the best way to go about it is to do an informal breakup where they each go their separate ways to focus on singles careers while still teaming on occasion, instead of doing the typical breakup angle. Speaking of breakups, we also saw the disintegration in this episode of the team of Rhea Ripley and Nikki ASH, which, let's face it, we all saw coming. It was inevitable. Anytime they have a team without a name, made up of makeshift partners where they're announced as partner and partner, it's usually surefire sign of things to come. I thought the breakup was handled rather well, but I think a bunch of people were expecting Rhea to turn instead of Nikki. I think the problem is that fans want Rhea to turn, and if they did that, Rhea would still come out looking like the babyface and wouldn't get the desired heel reaction. It'll be interesting to see what they do with these two moving forward, but I'd imagine that Rhea might be one of the front runners to win the Rumble this year and potentially challenge Becky at Mania. They did a lot of damage to her character in the last year, so that's a lot of work to undo. Good luck with that. It was great to see some of the other women on the roster main eventing the show this week in a triple threat number 1 contenders match. Doudrop came away with the win here, which presents kind of a weird dynamic, as we'll have heel versus heel at the Royal Rumble, but it's an interesting challenge for Becky, as she's not usually matched up with a much larger adversary. That said, Doudrop is probably the best in-ring performer of the 3 choices, so this will be her opportunity to show what she can do. And it isn't the only championship dynamic heading into the Rumble that is somewhat questionable. We have another heel versus heel in Roman Reigns versus Seth Rollins. I know they have a history there, but I'm still confused as to how Rollins, of all people, is deserving of a Universal title match against a champion of a show that he's not even on. And then Lesnar versus Lashley is probably the most intriguing of the 3 title bouts, as it's first time ever, much like Becky versus Doudrop, but unlike the women's match, this one has been highly anticipated for several years, maybe even decades. I've liked the interactions between the two of them thus far, but I'd like to see some promo battles between their 2 managers, Paul Heyman and MVP, and I suspect that we'll get just that in the coming weeks. And it's a pretty weird dynamic with these two as well, given that neither are really heels anymore, but they aren't really babyfaces either. They're what people like to call tweeners. I'd imagine that both will be making full turns by the time Mania comes around. One thing from Raw that does remain in my mind, and I think is very questionable, is the booking of Big E. I called it from the moment he won the Money in the Bank briefcase that as soon as he lost the title, he'd sink right back down to the mid-card, and it looks like Raw was the start of his downfall. Look, I understand that Seth is challenging for the Universal title and you need to book him strong, but they could have literally chosen anyone else on the roster to match him against, and they chose a guy who was WWE Champion about a week before Raw took place. At least they had a competitive match, but I'm still surprised that it was a clean finish. With Rollins being a heel, they had an easy out with him cheating his way to victory. Yeah, you need to book him strong, but you could have also positioned Big E as a favorite to win the Rumble. Now he just feels like just another guy. Speaking of just another guy, that is probably the term I'd use to describe Big E's former tag team partner on SmackDown, Kofi Kingston, who ends up losing to Madcap Moss. Oh my, has Kofi fallen completely off the map. Another former WWE champion. Okay, here's a thought for WWE to consider. Maybe don't put the title on someone that you have no faith in to carry the brand, and certainly have no long-term plan for. You not only make your performers look weak, but you make your titles look like a meaningless prop. SmackDown was actually pretty good for the most part, as it usually is. I like the execution of certain segments. I just didn't care for the actual segments, if that makes sense. I've already had enough of this Sonya and Naomi angle. I think they need to either do something with it or move on. But the thing that annoyed me the most is that they have plenty of female talent on the SmackDown side. Where was Shotzi? Where was Shayna? Where was Xia Li? Aaliyah has a 3-second match. Yet you have an entire segment reserved for Lita? Lita? Seriously? Okay, so I was a fan of hers like 22 years ago, or whenever she started. She eventually got stale, but did end up reinventing herself after the heel turn with Edge, but retired shortly after that. But why do we care that this woman is back? Sure, she's going to be in the Royal Rumble, but you know she's not sticking around long term. So why position her in the very top spot against Charlotte? I hope that's not the Mania program, by the way. But am I wrong here? I truly wish that WWE would stop living in the past and bringing back these stars that were over like 10 or 20 years ago, and instead start building to the future. Eventually, they're going to run into a situation where they're booking for younger fans who are not even going to know who any of these people are. I'm surprised that isn't the case already. I mean, I'm glad to see Lita back, but not booked against the top female star on the brand. The biggest highlight for me from SmackDown was the In Zayn segment. Sami Zayn has quickly become my favorite performer in the whole company. I'd imagine that him against Johnny Knoxville will probably be this year's WrestleMania celebrity match, and I don't have a problem with that because I'm sure Zayn will do what he can with the opportunity and hopefully position himself as one of the stars of the company. He's actually had a pretty good run thus far on SmackDown, and they need to keep this momentum going. Even if he loses to Knoxville, which he probably will, I hope he at least gets some mainstream attention out of it. So the other WWE show this week was NXT. They had been building to the match for weeks between NXT's hottest current star Grayson Waller and AJ Styles. I was hoping that this would be an angle instead of a match, where they could just keep building and have the blow-off at a bigger show like a TakeOver or even WrestleMania if they had the patience. Clearly they didn't, and they actually did the match for free. I liked the in-ring stuff, but I was puzzled by the finish. I think AJ could have afforded a loss in this one, and beating Waller did neither guy any favors. And what was even more puzzling was the aftermath where we saw LA Knight make his return and issue a beatdown to Waller as well. I don't even know what they do with Waller at this point. I think this whole thing was a mistake, and this post-match angle completely destroyed any momentum this guy ever had. They have a lot of damage to undo there. I guess this also means that Johnny Gargano is on his way out. But even if we assume that he is coming back, what does that match even mean now? Waller's momentum is shot. NXT UK had a really good main event this week as well between Walter and Nathan Fraser. It wasn't at Walter Dragunov level, but still pretty good, and it was apparently Walter's swan song on the UK side, as I've been hearing that he's headed over to the States full time, which is huge. I mean, imagine the match possibilities. It probably would have meant a lot more if the old NXT were still around, but this is still a pretty good deal. Before switching gears and talking about AEW, I have to mention the other piece of news that came out of the WWE this week, and that is that Raw announcer Corey Graves has been medically cleared for in-ring competition. That is great news, and I send my sincerest congratulations to him. If it's something he really wants to do, he has my full support, but my only concern is the difficulty for him to make the transition. Unlike Daniel Bryan or Edge, Graves is not someone that most people associate with being a wrestler. And I fear that because he's been doing the commentary thing for so long, fans might not be ready to accept him as an in-ring performer and probably won't be used to it. I hope he gets a strong reaction if he does appear in the Rumble, for instance. It's going to take a lot of work to distinguish between Corey Graves the announcer and Corey Graves the wrestler. If he can make it work, more power to him. So with that, I'm going to continue counting down the top 10 Royal Rumble non-Rumble matches with the top 5. So here you go. Number 5, the Rockers versus the Orient Express from the Royal Rumble 91. This was a great opening match. It was just non-stop action and very high octane. Certainly a match that was ahead of its time. I can totally imagine both of these teams in the current mix of wrestling tag teams in any company, with both being able to hold their own. Number 4, Brock Lesnar versus John Cena versus Seth Rollins in a triple threat match from the Royal Rumble 2015. I'm not usually a fan of triple threat matches, especially for a title, but these three made it work. I liked that they all had their own unique style of offense, and I never really felt bored at any time during the match, nor did I feel that any one of the three were ever left out, as is usually the case with most matches with more than 2 participants. Number 3, John Cena versus Umaga in a last man standing match from the Royal Rumble 2007. Yet another last man standing match, and one of my all-time favorite matches of that type. I love the story being told here, with Cena constantly battling back against all odds. It was the first time during Cena's title run where I truly felt that he was the underdog. Not that I expected Umaga to win, but Cena was positioned in such a way that he had to do whatever it took to secure victory, which is a story suitable for this kind of match. Number 2, Kurt Angle versus Chris Benoit from the Royal Rumble 2003. I was contemplating whether or not I should have had this match placed at number 2 or in the top 10 at all, considering who was involved, but I think I made the right choice. These two have never had a bad match in my opinion, but this I believe was the only one with a clean finish, and the only one for the WWE title, so it had to make the list. And the number 1 Royal Rumble non-Rumble match, Triple H versus Cactus Jack in a street fight from the Royal Rumble 2000. I watched this match for the first time at 15 years old, and I probably didn't have as much appreciation for it at the time as I do now. I never even knew about death matches until I had watched this one. Not that it was a death match per se, but you really needed to understand Mick Foley's history in these kinds of matches to be able to understand and appreciate what made this work. Such a well-told story and star-making moment for Triple H. This is the match that put him on the map. So there you have it. That's my list. Feel free to share yours in the Royal Ramble Facebook group. I know it's going to be hard to do after all that, but I'm going to attempt to make the transition now and talk a little about what we saw on AEW TV this week. It was definitely nice to see some of the bigger stars take part in AEW Dark this week. For those who are not aware, Dark and Dark Elevation are the AEW B-level shows taking place exclusively online, and the matches are usually one-sided squashes. So it was a little out of the ordinary to see some bigger stars on the show, and champions no less. In fact, the heavyweight champion of the world, Hangman Adam Page, took part in a 6-man tag, teaming with the Dark Order against Matt Hardy and Private Party. Now, it doesn't really take a rocket scientist to figure out which team is winning this match, but even still, it was good to see a higher caliber match on what is viewed by many as a lesser show. On Dynamite, we saw the continuation of the program between MJF and CM Punk. I love that they've been able to keep the ball rolling here without the two of them actually getting physical. I've complained a lot about AEW not usually booking long-term feuds, but I think this qualifies and I love it. I think this is the one program that will end up culminating in a match on pay-per-view at Revolution. Considering how things are going, I see no other logical destination. Fans are ready for it. The match between Punk and Wardlow wasn't great in my opinion. Personally, I don't see anything special in Wardlow. I think he's just a generic big man with a few solid moves. But I think it's the booking and his association with MJF that's saving him right now. Even though the match was below average, it wasn't really about the in-ring quality here, but more about advancing the Punk and MJF storyline, which they did, and rather effectively. So in that sense, it worked out pretty well. We also saw a new challenger emerge for Hangman's AEW World title in the Murder Hawk monster Lance Archer. I didn't think Dan Lambert was really needed for this segment, but I think as soon as Archer came out, we all knew where it was headed. I kind of like it as it's a new breed of opponent for Hangman. Archer isn't really a technician, he's more of a brawler, so that's kind of cool as it allows Page to adapt to different styles. I also like that Bryan Danielson was absent this week to continue selling his injuries, whether physical or emotional, from the title match last week. Also on the show, we saw a huge debut, and I mean huge literally, as Ring of Honor star Brody King showed up as a member of the House of Black and aligned himself with Malachi Black. This felt like another surprise just for the sake of it that really wasn't all that surprising. Judging from the crowd response, most people were expecting this, but despite all that, I thought it was handled pretty well, and I've often criticized AEW for not debuting new talent properly, but this was done okay. Talk about a long recap. That is insane. But that was the week in pro wrestling, and it's only January. Think about that for a second. I want to take this opportunity to remind any interested parties out there to submit your responses to the personality profile. If you send me a PM, I can send you the list of questions again to your inbox. This week in the hot seat is Andre Como, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Favorite band or musician? He says Panic at the Disco and 3 Days Grace. Some great choices there. Biggest thrill in life? Ring announcing a wrestling show in front of 350 people in Kyle, Saskatchewan. Wow, that's huge, man. Person you would most like to meet? I've met a few famous people, he says, being the biggest being Jack Black backstage and catering at a festival. The person I want to meet now is William Shatner. That's incredible. Favorite sport besides wrestling? MMA and hockey. Seems, Andre, that you and I have a lot of the same interests. Although I'm not much of a hockey fan these days, but I love my MMA. Favorite athlete? Patrick Waugh. Favorite TV show that must be still airing? He says for a show that he wants playing in the background as he games or goes to sleep, it's Community. The shows he loves seeing when they come out are Yellowstone and Billions, two shows that I've heard tremendous things about and I've yet to start, but looking forward to it. Hobbies. He likes his gaming. Favorite fast food? Popeyes. Amen to that, brother. Favorite video game? Of all time, he says he thinks Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage, or the Assassin's Creed franchise as a whole. I'm actually currently working my way through Black Flag as we speak. Favorite cartoon character? Bullet from Paradise PD. Favorite actor, he says Idris Elba. I loved him in the Suicide Squad reboot. Not so much in The Office, but he's had some pretty good roles, I think. Favorite actress? Anna Kendrick, he says. Favorite food? Spaghetti and meat sauce. Best advice ever received? He says, leave your shit at the door and have a positive day. Some great advice there. Secret talent? He's been told he's very annoying. Well, that's a talent for sure. I don't know how secret it would be. I guess you have to know you personally, Andre. Favorite movie? Clerks and Mallrats, he said. And just a bit of a trivia here for you, Andre, that the name Brody Lee, he actually took his name from the Mallrats character, both his real life name, Jason Lee, and his character name. Some very nice choices there, Andre. So now, keeping the focus on movies and television with a little bit of a wrestling twist, I want to throw up the spoiler alert warning right now, as I'm about to close out the show by talking about the series premiere episode of Peacemaker starring John Cena. HBO actually released the first 3 episodes of the series this week, but I only caught the first one. Usually for a new show, I give it the traditional 4-episode test, but I must say that I might already be hooked after episode 1. So it picks up right where Suicide Squad left off, and I was fortunate enough to watch the movie last weekend, so I was all caught up. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with the Suicide Squad, they're basically a group of misfits or anti-heroes, criminals if you will, who have been hand-selected by the authorities to take down even bigger threats. And as expected, there is conflict within the group itself. Cena's character is Peacemaker, and his role in the group is simple: to keep the peace. He plays a somewhat arrogant character in the movie and ends up turning near the end, as he thinks he's doing the right thing by preventing a file of information from getting out and exposing the wrongdoings of the government that the group works for. After killing one of his team members to keep the secret a secret, he ends up being shot in the neck by Idris Elba's character Bloodsport and assumed for dead. It is only in the after-credits scene when it's revealed that Peacemaker did not die and is in a hospital bed being restored to full health. So the show begins with Cena being released from the hospital and he thinks he's free to go. Little does he know that the Suicide Squad's mission is not over. And he's quickly recruited back into the team by the new team leader named Murr. I thought Cena's acting has improved tremendously since his first role, and I think he's finally found his niche. This is the perfect role for him in my opinion. So he's no longer an anti-hero per se, even if the rest of the group may be. He's a full-on good guy. He even has a new sidekick and a pet eagle named Eagly, which he picks up from his estranged father's house. And Cena's father, by the way, is played by none other than Robert Patrick, famous for his role in Terminator 2. Great casting choice. Actually, Patrick played the villain in Cena's first movie, The Marine. I know that seems like ages ago, but if you didn't know that, where have you been? I guess you can consider it your useless factoid of the week. Another new character in this one is Lyota Adebayo, the newest recruit to the team, played by Danielle Brooks, famous for her role as Tasty Jefferson in Orange is the New Black. I gotta say, I loved her in that role, but I think she's done a good job in this one as well. Some great casting choices here. We discover later in the episode that Adebayo is actually working for Amanda Waller, director of Argus, played by Viola Davis. In fact, we find out that Adebayo is actually Waller's daughter and is assigned to keep an eye on Peacemaker. As Peacemaker adjusts to the new team, he picks up a girl at a bar after being shot down by one of his new teammates, Amelia Harcourt. However, the bar girl turns out to be an assassin who attempts to kill him in her apartment, and he responds by placing the helmet on his head to blow her up. A great finish to a great episode, and still more to come. Next week's episode of the Royal Ramble will be a recap of the UFC 270 event next Saturday, and the second in the series of countdowns, focusing on the top 10 Royal Rumble non-wrestling segments. Until then, I'll leave you with an ABC.